Some stories find us when we need them most. This is one of those tales, a quiet kind of story about a woman who had nothing left to lose and a man the whole world had given up on. It's set in the summer of 1884 out in Arizona territory, where the land was hard and the people harder still, but even in the hardest places, grace has a way of taking root. If you're the sort who remembers when a handshake meant something, when folks looked out for their neighbors, and when love wasn't something you talked about, but something you showed well. This story was written with you in mind. It's about second chances, about the courage it takes to stay when everyone tells you to run, and about finding home in the last place you'd ever think to look. Pull up a chair. Let's begin. The train had been gone for 20 minutes, and Clara Whitmore was still standing on the platform. Heat pressed down from a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The smell of coal smoke lingered in the air, mixing with machine oil and the sharp scent of sun-baked wood. The boards beneath her boots had warped and split from years of heat. A single trunk sat at her feet. A carpet bag hung from her left hand. The brass clasps hot enough to burn. She read the letter again. The ink had smeared her own sweat. 3 days on a rattling train from St. Louis, but she knew every word by heart. I will be there when you arrive. We will begin our life together. Yours faithfully, Robert Hale. Faithfully. Clara folded the paper along its worn creases, tucked it into her sleeve. Her throat tightened, but her eyes stayed dry. Crying won't bring him. Crying won't feed you. The station master emerged from his office, a thin man with spectacles and a watch chain that caught the light. He looked at her the way you'd look at a stray dog, not unkindly, but with the clear understanding that she was not his problem. "Ma'am, you waiting on someone?" "Yes." "Train's the last one today. Next one comes Thursday." "I know." He nodded, went back inside. Clara sat down on her trunk. The calico dress she'd worn for 3 days stuck to her back. The paper fan from St. Louis had broken somewhere in Kansas. One of the bamboo ribs snapped clean through, and she'd thrown it out the window rather than carry something useless. An hour passed. Maybe 2. The sun moved. The shadow of the water tower stretched across the platform like a long, dark finger pointing east, pointing back the way she'd come. Somewhere behind her, a dog barked. Somewhere ahead, a life was supposed to be waiting. She watched the dust settle on the tracks. A woman appeared around the corner of the station, gray hair pinned beneath a bonnet, apron stained with flour. She carried a tin cup in both hands, careful not to spill. "You the mail order girl?" Clara looked up. "I beg your pardon. Robert Hale's intended." The woman said the name like she was spitting out something sour. "That's you, ain't it?" "Yes, ma'am, Clara Whitmore." The woman handed her the cup. Water, well drawn, cool despite the heat. Clara drank. It tasted like iron and something green. "He ain't coming," the woman said. Clara set the cup down on the platform. Her hands did not shake. She would not allow them to shake. "Pardon, Robert Hale, left town 10 days back, took the banker's daughter with him, didn't even pay his bill at the boarding house." The woman's eyes were not cruel, but they held no comfort either. "You ain't the first girl he's fooled, honey. Probably won't be the last." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Clara felt the ripples move through her chest, stomach, knees, but she did not let them reach her face. "I see. You got people back east. Someone to wire for a ticket home." Home. Clara almost laughed. Home was a boarding house room in St. Louis, paid through last month. Home was a mother's grave and a father's debts, and a stack of letters from a man who had promised her everything and delivered nothing. "No, ma'am, I don't." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in her expression, pity, maybe, or the memory of her own disappointments. "Boarding houses on Main Street. $3 a week, meals included. I'm Mrs. Patterson. You can stay tonight. After that..." She shrugged. "After that, you figure something out." She turned and walked away. Clara sat on her trunk as the sun sank lower. The shadows lengthened. The heat softened into something almost bearable. Somewhere in town. A church bell rang 6 times. She had $14 in her pocket. Enough for 4 nights at the boarding house if she skipped suppers. Enough for a train ticket back to nothing. The letter was still in her sleeve. She could feel it there, pressed against her skin like a bruise. Clara Whitmore had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met. She had sold everything she owned. She had said goodbye to the only city she'd ever known. And now she was sitting on a trunk in a town called Red Hollow, Arizona territory, with no husband, no prospects, and no way home. The platform was empty. The station master had locked his door. The tracks stretched east and west into nothing. She closed her eyes. Her lips moved without sound, a prayer she'd learned as a child. Words worn smooth from use. "Lord, I don't know what to do, but you do. Help me find my way." The first stars appeared, one by one. In a sky that felt impossibly far away. Tomorrow, she would figure something out. Tonight, she would simply survive. If this story touched something in your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell us where you're reading from. Sometimes the best comfort is knowing we're not alone. The boarding house smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee. Clara sat at the end of a long table, a plate of biscuits and gravy in front of her that she could barely afford. 2 women across the room spoke in voices just loud enough to carry. "Did you see the Turner wagon yesterday, bold as brass, coming into town like he owns the place?" "That man gives me the shivers. You know what they say, burned his own barn down. Touched in the head. My husband won't let me walk past his property. Says there's something wrong with a man who'd do that to his own land." Clara chewed slowly. Swallowed. The gravy sat heavy in her stomach. Turner. She filed the name away after breakfast. She walked. The milliner had no openings. The general store needed no help. The dressmaker looked at Clara's worn calico and shook her head before she even asked. By noon, the sun pressed down like a hot iron, and Clara had nothing to show for her morning but blisters on her heels and a growing certainty that Red Hollow had no use for her. She was passing the feed store when she saw him. Tall, raw-boned, shoulders broad beneath a faded work shirt, he stood beside a wagon loaded with grain sacks, his back to her. Then he turned. The scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a raised ridge of pale tissue cutting through sun-darkened skin like a dry riverbed. His eyes were brown, deep-set, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. A child's ball rolled across the dirt street, bouncing twice before it stopped at his boots. The man bent, picked it up, held it out toward the boy who'd been chasing it. The mother appeared from nowhere. She snatched her son's arm and pulled him back so fast the boy stumbled. She didn't look at the man, didn't speak, just hurried away with her child pressed against her skirts. The man's hand stayed extended. 1 breath, 2, then it dropped to his side. He turned back to his wagon, climbed up onto the seat. His shoulders curved inward, just slightly the posture of someone who had learned to take up less space. Clara watched him gather the reins. Everyone in this town was afraid of him. But as he drove past, she saw his face clearly, and what she found there wasn't madness. It was loneliness. She knew that look. She wore it herself. Clara woke before dawn. The boarding house was silent. She poured water from the pitcher into the basin cold, smelling faintly of rust, and pressed her hands into it. The shock traveled up her arms, into her chest. She splashed her face. Once. Twice. Water dripped from her chin onto the front of her chemise. In the small mirror above the washstand, a woman looked back at her, hollow around the eyes, skin pale beneath the sunburn, hair tangled from a night of turning. She braided it tight against her skull, pinned it up, put on her cleanest dress, the blue calico with the mended hem. The fabric was soft from washing, worn thin at the elbows. $7 left. 3 days, maybe 4, before she had nothing. Clara looked at herself one more time. Then she walked out the door. The town square sat at the center of Red Hollow, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Hitching posts lined the edges. A water trough sat near the general store, its surface green with algae. Flies hummed in the morning heat. His wagon was there. Caleb Turner stood beside it, lifting grain sacks from the back. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. The scar caught the early light pale against brown skin, running from temple to jaw. Clara's boots carried her across the square. She heard them on the packed dirt, felt her own heartbeat in her throat. He saw her coming. His hands stopped on the grain sack. He straightened slowly, watching her approach the way a man watches a snake still, waiting to see which way it moves. She stopped 3 feet away. "Mr. Turner?" "Ma'am." His voice was low, rough, like he didn't use it often. Around them, the square had gone quiet. A woman outside the general store set down her basket. 2 men near the blacksmith's forge stopped talking. Clara felt their eyes on her back like sunlight through a magnifying glass. "I need a husband," she said. The words came out clear, steady. She had practiced them in her head all night. I don't know what you need, but I'm asking." She swallowed. Her throat was dry. "Will you marry me?" Silence. Caleb Turner's eyes searched her face. Brown, deep-set, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. "You heard what they say about me." "I heard plenty." Clara held his gaze. "Ain't seen proof of any of it." Somewhere behind her, a woman gasped. Someone laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "The madman found himself a bride," a man's voice called out. Caleb didn't look away from her, didn't flinch. "You sure about this?" Clara thought about the boarding house, the empty platform, The letter in her sleeve that promised everything and delivered nothing. I'm sure I got no other choice. That enough for you? A long pause. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The flies kept humming around the water trough. It's enough, he said. The church stood at the end of Main Street. Whitewashed walls. A bell tower with a bell that hadn't rung in years. The smell of candle wax and old wood hung in the air. Dust motes floated in the colored light that came through the single stained glass window. The pastor, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked at them like they'd walked in covered in mud. You want to marry? Today? Right now? Yes, sir, Caleb said. The pastor looked at Clara. Miss, do you understand what you're agreeing to? I do. This man, I know who he is. The pastor's mouth thinned, but he opened his Bible. The pages rustled as he found his place. The Lord is my shepherd, he read, his voice flat. I shall not want. Clara heard the words like sounds through water distant, muffled by the blood pounding in her ears. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet. Someone coughed near the back of the church. The curious had followed them inside. Do you, Caleb James Turner, take this woman? I do. Do you, Clara Ann Whitmore, take this man? I do. Caleb reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring thin, gold, scratched from years of wear. His mother's. She would learn later. He took her hand. His fingers were rough, calloused. They trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. The metal was warm from his pocket. It fit loose, but it fit. Sign here, the pastor said. Clara took the pen, dipped it in the iron gall ink. The nib scratched against the paper as she wrote her new name, Clara Turner. The ink was still wet when she looked up. Caleb was watching her. His expression was unreadable, not cold, not warm, just waiting. Behind them, the church doors stood open. Through them, Clara could see the town square, the people who had gathered to watch, the whispers already spreading like smoke. She had done it, married a stranger, a man the whole town feared. We should go, Caleb said quietly, before they decide to make trouble. He turned toward the door. Clara followed. Outside, the wagon waited. The sun was climbing higher. The day was already hot. Clara climbed up onto the wagon seat beside her new husband. He gathered the reins. The horses shifted. The wagon lurched forward. And as they rolled out of Red Hollow, Clara realized she had no idea where he was taking her. The wagon wheels creaked. Dust rose in thin clouds behind them, settling on Clara's skirt, her sleeves, the back of her neck. Neither of them spoke. The land stretched out in every direction, brown hills dotted with scrub brush, patches of dried sage that filled the air with a bitter, dusty smell, the occasional juniper twisted by years of wind, no trees tall enough to offer shade, no water visible anywhere. Clara gripped the edge of the wagon seat. The wood was cracked, splintered in places, warm from the sun. Her trunk sat in the wagon bed behind her, shifting slightly with each bump in the road. She did not ask where they were going. He did not offer to tell her. The sun climbed higher. Sweat gathered at her hairline, trickled down her temples. Her dress clung to her back. The ring on her finger, his mother's ring. She reminded herself felt heavy and strange. An hour passed, maybe more. The road narrowed to little more than 2 ruts in the dirt. Then Caleb lifted his chin toward the horizon. There. Clara looked. A house sat at the base of a low hill. Small 2 rooms, maybe 3. The walls were weathered to gray, but the roof looked solid. Behind it stood a barn, the wood still pale and new-looking. Not yet bleached by the sun, cattle dotted the brown slopes beyond, maybe 30 head, scattered across the scrubland. Caleb guided the wagon down the final stretch of road. The wheels rattled over stones. A chicken scattered out of their path, squawking. He pulled the horses to a stop beside a water trough, climbed down, offered Clara his hand. His palm was rough, calloused. She took it, stepped down, let go. "This is it," he said. Clara looked at the house, at the barn, at the land stretching empty in every direction. "It's yours. Ours now, I reckon." He untied her trunk from the wagon bed, lifted it like it weighed nothing, carried it to the front door. The house was dark inside. Even with the door open, Clara stepped through and waited for her eyes to adjust. A kitchen. Iron cook stove against one wall. The door slightly warped from years of use. A table with 2 chairs. Shelves holding jars of beans, salt, cornmeal. A coal oil lamp sat on the table, the wick trimmed short to save fuel. Through a doorway, she could see a bedroom. A bed with an iron frame. A patchwork quilt, faded blues and yellows, worn soft from years of hands that were gone now. "Bedroom's through there," Caleb said. He set her trunk down by the door. "You take the bed. I'll sleep in the barn." Clara nodded. She didn't argue. He showed her the root cellar, the well out back, the privy behind the house. His words were spare, practical. He pointed. She looked. Neither of them smiled. When the tour was done, Caleb walked out to tend the horses. Clara stood alone in the kitchen. She found a wooden bucket by the door and carried water from the well. She found salt pork in the larder, beans soaking in a crock. She built a fire in the cook stove. The iron door groaned when she opened it and cooked supper while the light outside turned gold. Then orange, then gray. The salt pork sizzled in the cast iron skillet. The smell of rendered fat filled the small kitchen, mixing with the earthy scent of beans and the dry sweetness of cornmeal. Clara stirred, tasted, added a pinch more salt. Caleb came in when she called him. He'd washed his hands and face at the pump. His hair was damp, slicked back from his forehead, the scar more visible in the lamplight. They ate in silence. The beans were soft, savory with pork fat. The cornbread was dense and crumbly, slightly sweet on her tongue. Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. Caleb kept his eyes on his plate, chewed slowly, didn't look up. When he was done, he pushed back his chair. "Much obliged," he said. Then he walked out the door, toward the barn. Clara sat alone at the table. The lamp flame flickered. Shadows moved on the walls. Outside, the first coyote began to call a high, lonesome sound that made her skin prickle. She stood to clear the dishes. That's when she saw them. On the windowsill above the basin, A cracked clay vase, the kind you'd buy for a penny at a general store. Inside it, wildflowers. Dried now petals curling inward, stems brittle, colors fading to dust. They'd been there for days, maybe weeks. Clara touched one of the petals. It crumbled under her finger. Someone had picked these. Someone had put them in water and set them by the window where the light would catch them. Someone had been waiting. She thought of Caleb's face when she'd asked him to marry her. The way he'd said, "It's enough not hopeful, not resigned, just quiet," like a man who'd stopped expecting anything. Clara left the flowers where they were. She washed the dishes in water she heated on the stove. The soap smelled of lye harsh, familiar. She dried them with a rag and put them back on the shelves. The bedroom was dark. The quilt smelled of cedar and something older lavender. Maybe. Pressed into the fabric by hands that were gone now. She lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling. Outside. The coyotes kept calling. The wind pushed against the walls. The house settled and creaked. Clara closed her eyes. And in the darkness, she found herself wondering who had he been waiting for. Days folded into each other. Clara learned the rhythm of the ranch. She woke before dawn, built the fire, put coffee on to boil. The smell of it filled the kitchen dark, bitter, strong enough to strip paint. By the time the sky turned pink, Caleb was already gone saddle creaking, horse hooves fading into the distance. She scrubbed, mended, swept dust that came back the moment she turned around. She learned which burner on the cook stove ran hot, which drawer stuck, which floorboard groaned when you stepped on it wrong. Caleb returned after dark, ate whatever she'd made, said, "Much obliged," went to the barn. They barely spoke. But Clara noticed things. The way he left kindling stacked by the stove each morning. The way he'd fixed the wobble in her chair without being asked. The way he never looked directly at her face, as if he was afraid of what he might find there. On the 5th morning, a wagon appeared on the road. Clara was hanging wash on the line, her hands red from lye soap. The sheets heavy with water when she heard it. Wheels rattling. A horse nickering. She shaded her eyes against the sun. A woman climbed down from the wagon seat. Small, bright-eyed, brown hair pinned beneath a sunbonnet. She wore a gingham dress the color of summer grass. Caleb emerged from the barn. The woman ran to him. She threw her arms around his neck. He caught her, held her. And Clara saw something she hadn't seen before. His shoulders loosened. His head bowed. He held on like a man holding on to the last solid thing in a flood. "Hannah," he said, "you went and got married without telling me." The woman Hannah pulled back and swatted his arm. "I had to hear it from Mrs. Patterson at the Mercantile." The Mercantile. Caleb didn't know how to say it. "You could have tried." Hannah turned. Her eyes found Clara by the clothesline. "So you're her, the woman brave enough to marry my brother?" Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm Clara." Hannah crossed the yard in quick steps, up close. Clara could see the resemblance, same stubborn jaw, same brown eyes. But where Caleb's face was closed and guarded, Hannah's was open, warm. "Well, Clara, let's get inside and cook something proper. I want to know everything." They made cornbread. Hannah talked while she worked hands moving through flour and buttermilk, voice filling the kitchen like water filling a dry well. She talked about her husband, a farmer named Thomas Miller, 20 miles east, about their 2 children, about the years since she'd left home. And then, without warning, she talked about the fire. I was in the barn that night. Hannah's hands stilled in the bowl. Her knuckles went white against the crockery. Checking on a mare about to foal. Clara stopped stirring. The spoon went still in her hand. I didn't smell the smoke until it was too late. The hay caught first. Then the walls. Hannah's voice cracked. She swallowed hard. I couldn't find the door. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see my own hands. The kitchen was silent except for the crackle of the cook stove. Caleb heard me screaming. He came through that fire like it wasn't even there, grabbed me, dragged me out. Hannah looked up. Her eyes were wet, her chin trembling. Then he went back, for the horses. Said he couldn't let them burn. She wiped her eyes with the back of her flour-dusted hand. The roof came down while he was inside. A beam caught him across the face. He crawled out on his hands and knees. Clara's throat tightened. The horses, most of them died. The barn burned to nothing. Hannah's voice hardened, and folks decided it was easier to believe he'd gone mad. Set his own fire. They couldn't stomach thinking a man would walk into flames for his sister and come out looking like that. She reached across the table and took Clara's hands. Her grip was firm. Her fingers still trembled. Every scar on his face should have been mine. I ain't got a mark on me. Not one. Clara looked at her. At the smooth skin. The clear eyes. The weight she carried that no one could see. He never told them the truth. He never told anyone anything. Just let them believe whatever they wanted. Hannah squeezed her hands. You married a good man. Clara, the best man I know. Don't let anyone tell you different. Hannah left before sunset. Clara stood in the doorway and watched the wagon disappear down the road, dust rising behind it like a veil. When Caleb came in for supper, the kitchen smelled of cornbread and sorghum molasses. He sat at his usual place, ate without looking up. Clara watched him across the table. The lamplight caught the ridges of his scar. Why didn't you tell them? She asked. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Hannah told me. About the fire. About what really happened. Clara kept her voice steady. Why did you let them think you were mad? Caleb set his fork down. He stared at the lamp flame the way it flickered and jumped, casting long shadows on the walls. Folks needed someone to blame, he said finally. I was convenient. That ain't a reason. No. He was quiet for a long moment. I reckon it was easier being alone. When everyone wants you alone anyway. You don't have to pretend. The lamp hissed. The flame bent sideways, then straightened. Clara stood, walked around the table, stopped beside his chair. He didn't look up. His hands lay flat on the table, rope burned. Calloused. Still. She reached out. Her fingers touched his cheek, the scarred side. The skin was rough, ridged, warmer than she expected. He flinched. His whole body went rigid, but he didn't pull away. Clara felt the tremor that ran through him, felt the way he held himself perfectly still, like a man bracing for a blow that never came. You ain't alone anymore, she said. His eyes lifted to hers. Brown, deep, and for the first time since she'd met him, unguarded. His hand came up slowly, covered hers where it rested on his face. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The fence post was rotten at the base. Clara held it steady while Caleb swung the mallet. The impact traveled up through the wood, into her palms, her wrists, her shoulders. She gritted her teeth and held on. "Again," she said. He swung. The post sank another inch into the hard ground. Sweat ran down Clara's back. Her hands burned where the rough wood rubbed against skin. She could feel blisters forming, the tight, hot pressure of fluid gathering beneath the surface. She didn't let go. Caleb worked without speaking. His sleeves were rolled past his elbows, his forearms dark with sun and dust. The scar on his face glistened with sweat. They'd been at this since morning. 3 posts replaced. 2 more to go. The old fence had sagged so badly the cattle could step right over it. "One more," Caleb said. He swung. The post settled into place with a solid thunk. Clara let go. Her palms were raw red and white in patches. The skin peeled back in places. She wiped them on her apron without looking. Caleb saw anyway. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a bandana faded blue, soft from years of washing, held it out to her. "For your hands." She took it, wrapped it around her right palm. The fabric was warm from his body. "Much obliged," she said. Something flickered across his face, almost a smile. Not quite. That evening, supper felt different. Clara couldn't say exactly what had changed. The food was the same: beans, cornbread, salt pork fried crisp. The kitchen was the same: lamp flickering, cook stove ticking as it cooled. But when she passed him the bread, their fingers brushed, and when he said, "Much obliged," he looked at her when he said it, after supper. They sat on the porch. The rocking chair had one uneven leg. It tilted slightly to the left with each rock. Clara sat in it anyway. The motion was soothing. Back and forth, back and forth. The runners creaked against the worn boards. Caleb sat on the top step, his back against the post. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small. Metal. Tarnished. A harmonica. He put it to his lips, blew a note. It came out thin, wavering, slightly off-key. He played a few bars of something, a hymn. Maybe. Or a folk song Clara didn't recognize. His fingers moved uncertainly over the holes. One note squeaked. Another didn't sound at all. He stopped, looked down at the harmonica in his hands. "Ma taught me," he said. "Never did get good." Clara rocked. The chair creaked. The stars were coming out, first one, then another, then a scattering across the darkening sky. "My father played fiddle," she said, "when I was small, before he got sick." Caleb didn't say anything, but he turned his head slightly toward her, listening. "Consumption took him when I was 14. Coughed himself to death over the course of a winter." Clara's voice was steady. She'd told this story before, in her head, so many times that the edges had worn smooth. "Ma worked herself to nothing trying to keep us fed. Took in washing, mending, whatever she could find." The rocking chair creaked, back and forth. The night air smelled of sage and cooling earth. "She died 2 years ago, just wore out, like a rag that's been wrung too many times." Clara looked up at the stars. "That's why I answered the advertisement. Robert Hale's advertisement. Nothing left back east but graves." The night insects had started their chorus. Crickets. Something else, a buzzing. Rhythmic sound she didn't have a name for. Caleb was quiet for a long time. The harmonica turned over and over in his hands. Then he said, "Glad you came." 4 words. His voice was low, rough, barely above a whisper. Clara stopped rocking. She looked at him, the broad shoulders, the bowed head, the way he held the harmonica like something precious. The scar running down his face caught the last light from the kitchen window. "So am I," she said. He didn't look up, but his shoulders loosened. Just slightly, just enough. They sat in silence as the Big Dipper wheeled slow overhead. The night cooled. The stars multiplied. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. When Clara finally went inside, she expected to hear the barn door open and close behind her. It didn't. She was washing her face at the basin when Caleb came through the kitchen door. He carried his bedroll under one arm, a wool blanket that smelled of wood smoke and horse. He didn't speak. He spread the blanket on the floor beside the cook stove, lay down, pulled his hat over his eyes. Clara stood in the bedroom doorway. Her heart beat against her ribs, not fast, but hard. A slow, steady pulse she could feel in her throat. "Good night," she said. "Night," he said. She went to bed. The quilt smelled like cedar. The mattress dipped in the middle. Through the doorway, she could see the shape of him dark against the darker floor, the rise and fall of his breathing. He was inside, not in the barn, not across the yard. Here, in the house, close enough that she could hear him turn over, hear the wool blanket rustle, hear the soft sound of his breath. Clara closed her eyes. She slept better than she had in weeks. When she woke, the room was gray with pre-dawn light. She sat up, pushed the hair from her face. The blanket by the stove was folded. Caleb's boots were gone. But on the table beside her bed sat a cup. She reached for it, tin, dented, warm against her palms. She lifted it to her lips. The coffee was bitter and too strong. She could taste the grounds at the bottom. She drank every drop. And as she set the empty cup down, she heard it hoofbeats coming fast up the road. More than one horse, moving at a gallop. The hoofbeats belonged to a neighbor, old Mr. Dawson, from the next ranch over. He came to warn Caleb that 3 head of his cattle had gone missing in the night. Rustlers, moving through the territory. Clara needed supplies. They were low on flour, salt, coffee. She'd been putting off the trip to town for days. "I'll go," she said. Caleb looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, concern. Maybe. Or warning. But he didn't argue. "Be careful." She took the wagon. The road to Red Hollow stretched brown and empty under the morning sun. Dust rose behind the wheels and settled on her skirt, her sleeves, the back of her neck. The general store was quiet when she walked in. Mrs. Henderson stood behind the counter, a heavy-set woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. 2 other women browsed near the fabric bolts. They stopped talking when Clara entered. "Morning," Clara said. Mrs. Henderson didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved over Clara's face, her dress, the ring on her finger. "Mrs. Turner." The way she said it made Clara's skin prickle, like she was naming something unclean. "I need flour. Salt, coffee, if you have it." Mrs. Henderson moved slowly. She set a bag of flour on the counter, then salt, then a small tin of coffee. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, making Clara wait. Behind her, the 2 women whispered. Clara heard fragments, "that one," and "madman's woman," and "ought to be ashamed." Her face burned. She kept her eyes on the counter. "Anything else?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "That's all." Clara counted out the coins. Her hands were steady. She would not let them see her hands shake. She was reaching for the flour when Mrs. Patterson walked in, the boarding house keeper, the woman who'd told Clara about Robert Hale. She stopped just inside the doorway. Her eyes went wide. "Lord have mercy, you're still here." Clara straightened. "I live here now, with that man." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "Honey, you don't know what you've gotten yourself into." "I know exactly what I've gotten into." "Do you?" Mrs. Patterson stepped closer. Her voice dropped, but not enough. Everyone in the store could hear. "Rustlers have been hitting ranches all through the territory, 3 farms this month alone. And folks are saying your husband—" "My husband what?" The store went silent. Mrs. Patterson's chin lifted. "Folks are saying he's helping them, letting them use the North Pass through his land. That's how they're moving the cattle without getting caught." The words hit Clara like a slap. "That's a lie. Is it nobody sees him in town? Nobody knows what he does out there. And those rustlers always seem to know exactly which herds to hit." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were hard. "A man who'd burn his own barn down, who knows what else he'd do." Clara grabbed the supplies off the counter. Her movements were jerky, graceless. The flour bag slipped. She caught it against her chest, leaving a white smear across her dress. "My husband ain't nothing like what folks say." "Then why don't you prove it?" Clara pushed past her. Out the door. Into the bright, merciless sunlight. She was halfway across the street when her boot caught a rut. She stumbled. The flour bag tore. White powder exploded across the mud. She went down hard. Her palms hit the wet ground. There'd been rain the night before, and the street was a mess of churned mud and horse dung. The muck soaked through her dress, her petticoat. She could feel it cold and thick against her knees. Behind her. Someone laughed. Clara pushed herself up. Her hands were coated in brown slime. Her dress was ruined. The flour she'd spent good money on was scattered across the mud, already turning to paste. People were watching. From the boardwalk, from the store windows, watching the madman's wife crawl in the dirt. She stood. Her legs shook. Her face burned so hot she thought she might faint. She didn't look back. She walked to the wagon, climbed up onto the seat. Her muddy hands left streaks on the reins. The ride home took forever. When she pulled up to the house, Caleb was waiting by the barn. He saw her face. Her dress. His expression changed. What happened? Clara climbed down. Her legs felt unsteady. She gripped the wagon wheel for balance. "They say you're helping the rustlers." Her voice cracked. She tasted salt on her lips. "They say you're letting them use the North Pass." Caleb went still. "I told them it was a lie, but they—" She stopped, wiped her face with the back of her muddy hand. "They laughed at me, Caleb. They watched me fall in the mud, and they laughed." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked away toward the hills. The empty road. "Maybe I should go. Start over. Somewhere they don't know my face." Clara's head snapped up. "What? You could stay? Take the ranch. Tell them I left. You think I married you just to watch you run? I think you married me because you had no choice." "I had a choice." She stepped toward him. Mud dripped from her hem. "I'm making it again, right now. I ain't going anywhere. Neither are you." He stared at her. Then, from the road, came the sound of hoofbeats, many of them, moving fast. The riders weren't rustlers. It was Mr. Dawson again, his horse lathered with sweat. Behind him rode two other ranchers' men Clara didn't recognize, their faces grim beneath their hats. "They're in town," Dawson said, pulling up short. 5 of them rode in at dawn, demanding supplies, cattle, safe passage through the territory. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Sheriff, outmatched. He's trying to keep folks calm, but those men ain't in a calming mood." Clara watched Caleb's face, watched him calculate the distance to town, the odds, the cost. "Stay here," he said to her. "No. Clara, I said no." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned toward the barn. "I'll saddle the horses." They rode hard. The road blurred beneath them brown dust, scrub brush, the shimmer of heat rising from packed earth. Clara's hands ached from gripping the reins. Her thighs burned from holding her seat. When they reached the edge of town, she could see the crowd gathered in the square. 5 men on horseback formed a loose line near the water trough. Their coats were trail-dusted, their faces unshaven. The leader sat slightly ahead of the others, a wiry man with narrow eyes and tobacco stains on his teeth. Sheriff Burke stood in front of them, hands raised, palms out. His voice carried across the square. "Now let's just stay calm here. Nobody needs to—" "We ain't asking for calm," the leader said. His voice was flat, bored, almost. "We're telling supplies, cattle, and nobody follows us when we leave. That's the deal." The townspeople clustered behind the sheriff shopkeepers, farmers, women clutching children. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Clara saw Mrs. Henderson near the general store, her face pale. Mrs. Patterson stood beside her, arms wrapped around herself. Caleb dismounted. He handed his reins to Clara without looking at her. Then he walked forward. Slow, steady. His boots raised small clouds of dust with each step. The crowd parted for him. Not out of respect, out of habit. They'd been parting for him for years. He stopped 10 feet from the rustlers. "You want something," he said. "You ask proper. You don't threaten folks who got nothing to do with your quarrel." The leader turned his horse slightly, looked Caleb up and down the broad shoulders, the work-worn clothes, the scar running from temple to jaw. "Well now, you the madman, the one who burned his own place." "I burned nothing." "That ain't what folks say." "Folks say a lot of things." Caleb's voice didn't waver. "Most of it's lies told by people too scared to look at the truth." The leader spat tobacco juice onto the dirt. "And what's the truth?" "Scarface. The truth is I saved what I could, same as I'm doing now." Silence. The leader's hand drifted toward his hip, toward the pistol holstered there. Clara was off her horse before she knew she'd moved, walking forward, stepping up beside Caleb. "You leave," she said, "or you deal with both of us." The leader laughed, a short, ugly sound. "A madman and his woman, that's what's standing between us and what we want. That's right." Movement in the crowd. Clara turned her head. Hannah pushed through the gathered townspeople. Her gingham dress was dusty from the road. Her face was flushed. She walked until she stood beside Clara. "He ain't mad," Hannah said. Her voice rang clear across the square. "He pulled me from a burning barn 3 years ago. I was trapped inside. The roof was coming down. He went through fire to get me out." She pointed at Caleb's face. "Every scar he carries is because of me. Not because he's crazy, Because he wouldn't let me die." The square went still. Clara watched the faces in the crowd, watched the shift that moved through them, confusion first, then understanding, then something that looked like shame. The pastor stepped forward, a thin man with ink-stained fingers. He moved slowly, like his legs didn't want to cooperate. "I knew," he said quietly. "I knew the truth. Hannah told me years ago. I never said anything." He came to stand beside Hannah. Then the shopkeeper. Then Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who had watched Clara fall in the mud just hours ago. Her face was red. She couldn't meet Clara's eyes. But she came. One by one. They stepped forward, not many, but enough. The line behind Caleb grew. The rustler leader watched this happen. His hand still rested near his pistol. His eyes moved from face to face, counting, calculating. 5 men against a town. Clara held her breath. The leader's eyes came back to Caleb. Something moved behind them. Not fear, exactly. Something older, something tired. He looked at the people standing behind Caleb, looked at the women and the old men and the pastor with his ink-stained fingers, looked at Hannah, small and fierce, her chin lifted. Then he looked at Clara, at the mud still drying on her dress, at the way she stood beside a man everyone had feared. His jaw worked. He spat again. "Ain't worth it," he muttered. He turned his horse. The others followed. They rode out of the square at a walk, not hurried, not panicked, but leaving all the same. Nobody followed them. Clara's knees felt weak. She reached for Caleb's arm to steady herself, found his hand instead. His fingers closed around hers. The crowd began to disperse. People moved in small clusters, talking quietly. But Mrs. Patterson walked toward them. Her steps were slow, reluctant. She stopped a few feet away. "I was wrong," she said. The words came out rough, like they hurt. "About your husband, about a lot of things." She looked at Caleb. "I'm sorry." Caleb didn't speak, but he nodded, once. Mrs. Patterson turned and walked away. The square was almost empty now, just Clara and Caleb and Hannah, standing in the afternoon sun. "Let's go home," Clara said. Caleb's hand tightened around hers. "Home," he repeated, like he was learning the word for the first time. The next morning, the pastor came. Clara was hanging wash when his wagon appeared on the road. She watched him climb down slow, uncertain, like a man approaching something he feared. Caleb emerged from the barn. He stood with his arms at his sides, waiting. The pastor stopped a few feet away. His hat was in his hands. He turned it round and round, fingers working the brim. "I knew the truth," he said. "Hannah told me, years ago." His voice cracked. "I should have said something. I should have stood up for you. I didn't." Caleb was silent. "We did wrong by you. I did wrong." The pastor looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm asking your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I'm asking." The silence stretched. A meadowlark sang from the fence post. "I ain't much for grudges," Caleb said finally. "Takes too much energy." The pastor nodded. Once, he put his hat back on, climbed into his wagon, drove away. Clara watched him go. Then she looked at Caleb. His face was still, but something in his shoulders had loosened. An hour later, Mrs. Henderson arrived. She carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper. She wouldn't come inside, just stood on the porch, holding it out like an offering. "For your home," she said. Clara unwrapped it, a quilt, patchwork, in faded blues and yellows. The stitches were small, and even the work of careful hands over many hours. "I made it years ago," Mrs. Henderson said. "Never knew who it was for. I reckon now I do." She turned and left before Clara could respond. The days that followed brought more visitors. Not many, but enough. Mr. Dawson came with 2 of his ranch hands to help repair the north fence. The blacksmith rode out to check on Caleb's horses, said he'd heard one was throwing a shoe. The shopkeeper's wife sent a basket of preserves with her husband, who couldn't quite meet Caleb's eyes but handed it over anyway. Small things, awkward offerings, insufficient apologies wrapped in practical kindness. But they were something. The ranch began to feel different. Clara couldn't say exactly how. The land was the same brown hills, scattered cattle, the rebuilt barn throwing long shadows in the evening light. But when she walked the property now, she didn't see emptiness. She saw possibility. One evening, she stood at the fence line, watching the sun sink toward the hills. The light had turned the color of old copper. A meadowlark sat on a post nearby, singing its evening song. The air smelled of sage and cooling earth. Caleb came up beside her. His boots crunched on the dry grass. He leaned his forearms on the top rail, looking out at the same view. "Reckon we could hire some help," he said. "Come spring, expand the herd a little. Reckon we could maybe fix up that back room. It ain't much, but it could be something. Storage, maybe, or—" He trailed off. Didn't finish the thought. Clara turned to look at him. His profile was sharp against the copper sky, the strong jaw, the weathered skin, the scar running from temple to chin. "Reckon you made the right choice?" he asked. "Back in that square." She reached for his hand, lifted it, pressed it flat against her belly. His fingers spread across the calico. Warm. Rough. Still, I reckon I made the only choice that could have led here. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. "Clara, come spring," she said. "A baby. Ours." His hand stayed where she'd put it. His chest rose and fell once, twice. His jaw worked. His throat moved as he swallowed. His eyes found hers. They were wet at the edges, but they didn't spill. "A baby," he repeated. "A baby." The meadowlark sang. The sun touched the hilltops. The light shifted from copper to gold to the deep purple of coming night. Caleb pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her, careful, gentle, like she was something precious. His chin rested on top of her head. She could hear his heartbeat against her cheek. Steady. Strong. They stood like that as the stars came out. First one, then another. Then a scattering across the darkening sky. The lantern glowed in the kitchen window behind them. The cattle lowed in the distance. The rebuilt barn stood solid against the night. Clara closed her eyes. She thought about the platform in Red Hollow, the letter that promised everything and delivered nothing. The moment she'd stepped off that train with one trunk and one carpet bag and no idea what came next. She thought about the man they'd all feared, the man who'd walked into fire for his sister and come out scarred, the man who'd said, "It's enough," when she asked him to marry her, the man whose hand now rested on her belly, where their child was growing. "Caleb," she said. I'm glad I came." His arms tightened around her. His voice came low and rough against her hair. "So am I." The night settled over them. The stars wheeled slow overhead. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust, and something sweeter rain. Maybe. Coming in from the west. Clara Turner stood on the porch of her home, in the arms of her husband, with their future growing inside her. Not a perfect life, but theirs. There's a certain kind of quiet that settles after a story like this one. Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that feels full. Heavy in a way that isn't unpleasant. Like setting down something you've been carrying for a long time. Many of us know what it is to be unseen, to stand in a room full of people and feel invisible, to love someone quietly, without recognition, without anyone noticing the small kindnesses we offer day after day. And many of us know what it is to be misjudged, to carry a story that others have written about us, one that isn't true, but that we've grown too tired to correct. Some things don't need to be understood. Some wounds don't need to be explained. It's all right to let them rest. It's all right to simply be here, in this moment, holding whatever you're holding. You stayed until the end. You gave this story your time, your attention, your heart. That's no small thing. Thank you for being here.